Okay, so hi, welcome back to the next episode of this series where I just commentate on everything I did. And this time I wrote a script so I can stay on topic and I don't stutter and stammer as much like I did in the previous episode. Anyway, so let's just before we start the first episode, let's talk about some questions. So I think one question that I got was looking back, I have used Sony Vegas Pro before, but I later switched to Premiere Pro for a really simple reason. I use Adobe Creative Suite a lot, so I already use Illustrator, I use Photoshop very often, so I decided to just try out Premiere Pro, and I decided to commit to it. Unfortunately, I only edit for a hobby, so that means I do have to take hiatuses if I'm busy with work, or I just don't feel like I'm up for it. And in fact, I actually decided to sort of quit editing, I think 4 years ago. So the only thing that ever really inspired me to come back and edit anything was really one good anime that I really love a lot. It was about 2 years ago. And of course BTS. Yeah, I actually really wasn't intending on continuing this as a hobby because I just didn't have the time for it, but somehow just made time for it. Anyways, this intro series was published about 2 years after I edited the last thing I published, and before that just hadn't done anything for 4 years. So within that time I got 2 new computers and I just didn't bother installing it, and I guess by the time I decided I want to get back, I just wanted to start fresh. On the upside though, I do like Premiere Pro because they give me a lot of advantages in that I get a lot of flexibility in how I can control certain aspects. So if I want to do a certain effect, I do have to do a little bit of extra work to do the same thing in Vegas, but I feel like I get a lot more control into what I can do. So I feel like, you know, once you have like training wheels, I guess once you kind of want more freedom and you feel like you know what you're doing, you start getting into more advanced stuff where a lot more things are just more customized to your liking. So that's why I decided to use Premiere Pro, even though I did work with Vegas Pro before. I think this is a very important question because whenever you're making something, especially when you're trying to, for example, promote BTS to, like, you know, potential listeners and whatnot, you have to keep in mind who are you targeting. If you're trying to target a wide range, it is not easy to cast a huge net and make something that's good. So my audience and my intended audience for this was just young adults or people who are older than me who prefer a very, I wouldn't say candid or unbiased because this is totally biased on my end, but if they like a very documentary-like impression of the guys that has a lot of polish and it's something that they feel they can take seriously, that's why I made this. The series is for people who like to have some substance in their content and use their thinking caps as they watch something. So you'll notice how a lot of times I just sort of leave the viewer to their own devices so they can figure things out. Because one of my personal rules is that I only teach someone if they have the willingness to learn and if they ask politely, you know. So you can see part of that principle apply here. So I have friendly reminders. It's not commands. It's not a demand for people to do something. It's just kind suggestions, and if people want to take up on that and maybe take my advice, you know, they'll do it. I don't think this would fare very well for people who prefer a lot more flashy stuff, a lot more comedy, I guess, because I think a lot of people have said this is not as, you know, it doesn't show off the guy's funny sides, but, you know, I'm no good at writing for comedy, so that's why I don't do it. So it wouldn't appeal to those types of people. I'm sure there are other intro series that can do that. It's not for people who get to turn their brain off and get spoon-fed that information. So you know, I'm not just here to just dispense a bunch of information. It's just a guide. It's a gentle introduction. If you want to go into more of it, you figure it out on your own. You do that stuff on your own. But, you know, I don't think this should be the only type of intro series that people should be exposed to. There are many types of intro series that take many different angles, and I think that's okay, because I think we should make different types of intro videos that appeal to different audiences so you can bring in more types of people through different ways. So we're about to get started on the first episode, so I'm just gonna go full screen here. This is a 7-minute video, which was actually the perfect length for me. I actually intended to keep a very hard limit on 8 minutes, but then after a while I had to change it to 10 minutes. You already know the reason why from the previous episode. This is 7 minutes, so it's perfectly fine to like show people because it doesn't require as much effort to sit through time-wise. And although because it's short and it's also for a much more general audience, I have to be very careful about the words and vocabulary I use, so that means not using a lot of Korean terms where I have to explain everything, because this is a gentle introduction, not a crash course, and if you want to know more, then you will eventually just figure it out, look it up on your own. If you know, have that sort of determination to get into BTS. And concepts or things that are kind of exclusive to like this sort of thing, like aegyo and having a bias, I don't talk about that either because, you know, I don't have one and I don't think it's really that important because I don't pay attention to it, and most people getting into this don't pay attention to that either. So in places where that sort of terms do appear, I have to replace that jargon with expressions that would make more sense to people, just like how I have to tweak some translations so they flow better in English, because sometimes the translations like translate a bit too directly, so the word structure is a bit wonky for people who are just like who only know English or don't know Korean or anything and are not used to, like, you know, straightforward translations. So sometimes I have to do that. Sometimes things slip though, because I get tired and I just don't pay attention, so sometimes people have been kind enough to tell me where I've made some mistakes or whatnot. I lost a lot of sleep over making all these episodes, so I better hope they're worth it. Okay, project file is open, but we'll just get to that later. And let's just start on this first episode. So I think the first thing we're going to talk about is this subtitles notice here. So in this notice, you know I do this for the first couple episodes of the series. Most of the time the guys are always speaking Korean. If you want to try and ease a more English-speaking audience to get used to this, you're going to have to provide subtitles, or if not just English or whatever language, because, you know, I managed to have community contributions over on the side here that are still open, so if you still want to add subtitles, it's there. But yeah, I could have done the hard way of applying hard subtitles, at least in English. Like, you know, take the English subtitles and burn it into the video. You've actually seen me do that for the Twitter versions of these videos, where I make a sort of 1-minute short version to promote this series on Twitter. I don't do it for the entire thing because, in a way, adding English subtitles sort of ruins the aesthetic a bit, and also when I was starting this, I was very much intending for this to work for all sorts of other audiences as well, if possible. If I had English subtitles at the bottom here, it would just be really hard for people who are trying to read it in other language and see their subtitles on top, and it might be a bit wonky in that sense. Also, this is a bit of training for anyone who's coming in to like BTS, because everyone knows that having subtitles on is a very important thing, especially if you're trying to understand the meaning of songs. It has been pretty disappointing seeing people, you know, give up like on the whole thing because, you know, they just watch it and they just say like, oh, I don't understand what they're saying. So I just made a very much more gentle reminder, so that way people can start getting into the habit about it. So this intro series is a bit of a tough love on my part, so you gotta figure this out on your own, in a way. because other BTS content don't tell you to turn on subtitles. So, you know, better learn it now before you learn it later and miss out on a lot. Let's just play the first couple seconds and then I'll discuss why I cut it this way. Okay, so the song choice for this one was DNA. And at the time that I was editing this, this was around late April, early May. I think the most recent title song that was out was DNA, so I used that. In retrospect though, I think this was a very excellent choice because it's has a very welcoming tone, especially at the very beginning. You know, I want to give that sort of feeling of anticipation. So I edited that part in the music video because that whistle part was directly from the music video. And he just whistles in isolation away from the rest of the song. But then I guess while I was editing this, you know, like in the music video, there's the part where the camera whooshes around and I have to mute that one. That was a bit of a challenge. Also, for extra effect, I actually put a bit of an echo at the end of the sound. That way it kind of drowns out the camera sound and also doesn't sound as abrupt, and it also adds to that suspense. And now we go into this part where guys essentially introduce themselves in various different languages, and the reason why I did this was to subtly highlight how widespread BTS is. In a way, this is sort of like, you know, they've been around the world, here's them introducing themselves in many languages, because that's how well traveled they are. I couldn't get all the language though, and sometimes some of the videos were not in as good as a resolution I could have had them in, so I'm really sorry that I couldn't include all the languages possible that they've spoken or greeted themselves in. Okay, so that's the introduction, and I think that's how you form a very strong introduction. Yeah, so let's just skip. So this part where Ellen talks and introduces the members here, this interview is actually really good because Ellen goes straight to the point and just asks, so who are you guys? Just introduce yourselves, and this will set off the sequence where they just introduce themselves with their title cards and whatnot. And her question frames her as a surrogate for the audience because, you know, the viewer themselves are also asking the same question, like, who are these people? As an editor, it's my job to answer those questions and immediately just get those questions answered as soon as they're thinking that stuff. Also, it would be a lot more charming for the boys to introduce themselves as well, because this is about them. This isn't about me. This isn't about whatever narrating voice I could have used.
RM, I'm the leader of this crew.
Okay, so this is probably the most contentious part of this video. Anyone who's been with me knows all the troubles that I went through about this. Anyways, so for this sequence, I wanted to do a very nice, clean way of presenting information because in a fast-paced video, you can't write paragraphs and expect people to read that stuff. There were a lot of times I did want to put quotes in there, but because they didn't actually say it, and that would force me to just put a big giant wall of text here. I didn't think a lot of people would bother to read it, so I wasn't able to include all that stuff, and I can't just write a big giant, like, sentence here because this is only going to be like 5 seconds. I know people do pause this so they can read all of it, but sometimes people don't, so then I just keep it short, simple. My inspiration for this sort of layout was like a PowerPoint, but the hardest part was transitioning everything and make everything flow nicer because I did want to make this very polished, but I didn't want to make it look like I made it out of, I don't know, something out of Windows Movie Maker or something simple like that. To give it extra polish, I had this sort of sliding animation for every single component here, including this part here in the back. At first I didn't think I could do it, so I actually at first looked through a bunch of templates online for business presentations. But then after seeing how sort of easy it was, I decided, you know, just to do it all from scratch. So we're just gonna, how about we show that part off a bit? So let's just look at RM's profile. in here, you can see like this whole entire sequence by itself. So you can see here, like there's different moving components in here. And once we draw out, we have this sort of black space here, so that when we have the clip underneath it, that's the next thing that will show. You'll see that there's different layers here. There's extra layers because this at first used to be on a whole, its entire channel by itself, but I eventually moved it. So now we have this. So if you notice here, what I do, I'm just going to remove these two parts, and you notice how I just shift these things here, so that way his face is centered on this quarter section. There's still a black space here, but it doesn't matter too much because no one's going to see that, because we put this purple thing here, so they won't see that. Although it's very tricky to get this thing to get the back layer here to slide before this one, because this thing has different velocities to make it look like it's part of different pieces, like a diorama. The title itself is on a different layer, moves at its own velocity, at its own pace, and then it leaves at its own pace. In fact, it's the last thing to leave the sequence. Also, the text here just kind of is pretty easy. It just fades in. In fact, I think the first thing that I wanted to, and probably the reason why I had so many layers here, was because I actually thought that I wanted to get every single line to slide in the same way as this part does. But that would be a lot of components, a lot of trying to control how fast everything went, because, you know, depending on the size, the velocity has to be different, and depending on the position, every velocity has to come at different times. And I thought it wasn't worth it. Yeah, I guess there's 7 elements here. I believe that's sort of because, you know, human memory, you can usually memorize up to like 7 numbers, and also there's 7 members, so haha, 7, power of 7. But yeah, most times, you know, up to 7 things, people can usually remember up to 7 things at once, so. And a lot of these titles are already like, or these characteristics are already just like repeated anywhere, so like these things people will remember. If you have like 4 or 5, people will remember. Yeah, that's how this thing works. Yep, so that was text animation that I ended up doing from scratch after a lot of thought. I think it did okay. It's very simple. It's not overly complicated like a lot of those business presentation templates that I want to do. Okay, so let's discuss about the choices of text that I chose for each one. Mostly because I think a lot of people would be dying to know what I thought and why I did this. Anyone who's been with me knows that I uploaded this about 3 times. And at some point I kind of gave up because I was just getting so tired of just staying on the same video, and I just want to get to the next one. There's still mistakes, I'll admit it, especially V's, because there was one term that apparently confused a lot of people, and I had to change that term, lyricist, to songwriter, so it made more sense to people. I didn't take that one out of V's, and I still feel pretty bad about that, but I can't edit that anymore, so it's all set in stone. We're gonna just talk about this slide. So RM's slide, he's just, let's try a different expression. Anyway, so first part here, it used to say Genius IQ, Genius IQ. I think someone actually commented to me that, you know, maybe that might not be a good term to use because it puts a lot of pressure on him saying that he's the smart one. It also kind of downplays everyone else's intelligence in the team, and I think that would be very bad. I decided not to do that, and after a lot of thought I just say, okay, IQ of 148. It's a high number. If people do know about IQ numbers, the fact that this number is very high would probably be significant to them, but, you know, most people would be like, oh wow, that's a big number. He must be smart. And then combined with the second part, yeah, I feel like that explains everything. Fluent in English, yeah, there's really not much to say, because, you know, that's just something that I think a lot of people, especially when they're getting to BTS and they're more of an English speaker, that's probably the first thing they notice about Namjoon. So that's just kind of there. I didn't have to put too much thought into this one because this was easy. Okay, we'll just go to Jin's right now. And I think a lot of people figured out this was worldwide handsome, but I don't think people figured it out, but, you know, couldn't fit that without making this word very, very small. A good cook. This is a little bit of a throwaway. And once again, because I cannot say can't start jumping into like Korean words yet, so I can just say the oldest. People get what that means. It's just there because, you know, someone's always going to ask who's the oldest, who's the youngest. So if you put this here, it just makes sense. So Yoongi's, pretty straightforward. I couldn't fit passionate about music, so eventually had to choose lives for music. It took me a while to figure out maybe this was gonna work. This is a throwaway line. This was the best word I can think of describing him in one word, especially the whole part where he tends to be pretty straightforward about how he feels in his songs, especially when he's discussing a lot of tough issues. He just cuts to the chase, so, and if he wants to say something about like certain issues, he just cuts straight to the point. Yeah, that's him, very easy. Hobie, yeah, so these are, you know, all the usual titles of his position, and of course to talk about his background as a street dancer. These are a little bit of a throwaway because again, not very much sleep. I needed to churn this out, and I was at school, so this was the best I could come up with. I really feel that maybe it could have been better, but I suppose people can sort of understand what this means, at least from a very surface level. We'll just move on. Okay, Jimin's. He was the hardest because I had to take a couple days to figure out how to do a lot of these terms. So this is easy. This one's a no-brainer. I'm pretty sure a lot of the members post on their Twitter account. Is just, I feel like I know him like a lot just because he posts a lot there. This is because he's a very kind guy who always looks out for his team members. I don't think that's like the perfect word for it, but that's the best I could have came up with. And yeah, that's the throwaway line. It's kind of obvious. Okay, so we go into V section. This is, you know, all the stuff. You can see this mistake here. I'm not sure what I actually would have replaced that with. I think it would have been something that would have talked about his emphasis on being an individual person and just retaining his, you know, distinct personality. Yeah, and of course this phrase was where I cheated in the font size, so it's slightly smaller than this stuff up here. I wanted to put something else here. I just don't remember. Okay, so Jungkook's like video. God damn it, okay. Jungkook's video here is about, you know, things. I can't say maknae, so I have to say youngest. Can't say golden maknae, so I chose jack of all trades. For those of you not familiar with this expression, it means someone who dabbles in everything and is pretty good at generally everything. But you should be very careful about using this phrase when you're trying to describe someone who's good at everything like Jungkook, but because there's an extended version of this phrase meaning jack of all trades, master of none, which is not as flattering because it implies that because you're trying to learn everything but you can't specialize in them because you're just spending so much time spreading your time learning all these other skills, you end up having a very superficial understanding of something. That means you don't know very much about this even though you dabble in everything. I think that's not a very flattering way to describe Jungkook. Using this phrase by itself is fine. The whole extended phrase, master of none included, I feel like that's a bit of foreshadowing on how Jungkook will express how he feels about himself, even though he's a very accomplished individual. Okay, so that was the introduction. Then we just cut to the rest of the video. Here is a bit of a technique that I use. I'm going to share very quickly. Because this video was only in 720p when I got it, and I couldn't get a higher resolution version of this, I decided that to keep this rather than just make this a huge image and then just make a second duplicate of this, but scale it up and then put a Gaussian blur on it. That way it fills up the screen and it doesn't feel empty. So that is why it's framed this way.
Fans are called ARMY. What does ARMY stand for?
In Korean, our name means Bulletproof Boy Scouts, so it stands for BTS. And so, like, we got these army, like, you know, right beside us. So
yes,
that's
you
what
certainly do have an army.
Yeah.
So this section guess the first thing I want to talk about is song choice. So I chose Hip Hop Lover. First reason I did that was for a change of pace, because we just finished DNA, and it is a very pleasant sounding pop song about love. So I think we should also acknowledge that BTS originally started as a hip-hop group, and I think speaking to their roots is when they're talking about their mission is a very fitting song. And of course we're going to discuss their diverse range of music. One thing that you'll probably notice is that if you listen carefully to this excerpt where Hip Hop Lover is happening, you can actually hear each rapper singing. The reason why was because I edited that way, so it actually sounds like this. So we're going to have a bit of a listening session.
People wonder why we love is H-I-P, H-O-P. Shit. Why we got so much Yasmin's culture. Tell me. It was a new world. 평소에 그리 나시나 그저 기름 내게 심청이만 하게 다가와 내가 못 뜨던 새 눈을 뜨게 해 Boy, people keep asking baby why you love that hip-hop shit. 그럼 나는 말해 이유 노래 없어 cause it's hip-hop. 힙합, 에팍 몸무를 느끼며 게이팜 부갈로 킹타 올스쿨 리듬 타 맥해 외탁의 람과 혀를 밀착 두각을 나타내 지금은 랩 댄스 교재 팝의 롤 모델 다 듀버보이 해피카이 서툰 날 이력 써서 무명의 무대 파이 아무것도 모른 날 일으켰지 매일 내 맘을 울린 아티스트 링 몸으로 표현만 했었던 비교와 투팍의 나스날도 하나같이 하나보는 랩스타 남들과 비슷한 삶이 혐오했던 꼬맹이의 조스감 조이의 모두가 자꾸만 하더라도 내 안에서 자리를 고수하 힙합은 날 송두리 째띠질 뻔나 그 어린 날 교과서 기둥이에 적어 내렸던 나 60 verse 덕분에 난 안정된 사포를 짚고 갔던 대구 남산동의 작업실에 난 던지고 밤새도록 깔았던 무딘 팬쪽에 날 노래 끝에 난 결국 학창시절에 받는 언수 왜 대신해서 빼곡히 태워 같은 라임 더니 dreams come true.
So we're just gonna leave it at that because it's just the rest of the song that you already heard before. And so you notice how here we sort of edit it so that way the thing moves smoothly. That way it sounds like, you know, it's just the song as it's supposed to be. There's actually more to the song, but you edit it so that way it fades and it seems very smooth, as if it was always like this way. That's kind of the way how I like to edit the music. I think a lot of people tend to overlook this sort of skill when trying to fit music onto something. The best parts of the song, you can't always have them, especially if you're editing for a very small portion. So the solution to that is to put a little extra work and shorten it so that way you can get your favorite parts within the section. Word of advice, if you're trying to edit music to your stuff, maybe you should try to add a little extra effort and make it sound very fluid and also be allowed to keep your favorite parts in. A bit of a word of caution though is that when you're editing, especially you're cutting out music, and you're trying to show what music means to people, you should be very careful about where you cut, because especially if you don't know any Korean, so I'd highly suggest you have the lyrics on the side, somewhere on the side where you can sort of see it, and then you should like consult it a lot, otherwise it's going to sound weird. But yeah, maximize the effect of the music so that way you can make your video much more effective. So we're just gonna go back. So a lot of people do ask what BTS means, because, you know, people are like, does it mean behind the scenes? Because that's how it usually means around here. You gotta answer that out for them, very straightforward. And I really like this part because while Hobie's talking about how BTS is meant to block something, it is, in fact, the original icon was a bulletproof vest. Now it still sort of looks like a bulletproof vest, just a much more abstract version. When we're saying that the meaning of Bangtan is to block something. So then you can see I chose very aggressive clips to go with it, and stuff that has to do with struggling, youth, or protecting. And I especially like this one a lot. This concept trailer holds a lot of meaning for me. I think the best part of this is that you can see them advancing like a wall, and it sort of gives this sort of visual metaphor that they are here to block something. That was sort of a good choice on my part. A little bit more acknowledgement about the fact that they won Billboard. This is important. And it's good to have, you know, one or two outside voices saying, this is why I think people like them. I still remember when this interview piece came out, and I thought it was really good, so I held on to it for a while, and that's why I got to use it. And this one is, oh boy, this one's a very important interview. Kind of gets overlooked a lot because it's hard to find. It's important because it talks about, I think it puts a lot into perspective about what BTS's music is all about. They don't have a very strict formula, they don't have a very strict genre. They're always skipping around a lot and experimenting and fusing genres together. They like to play with their music, and I think that's good. Yeah, it's an important fact I feel people should know, because a lot of times when I listen to a group or an artist, I think one of my observations is that they usually have a pattern, you know, in their album, in their entire career, in their style, and usually they tend to be stuck with that for the rest of their lives. And, you know, if you like it a lot, that's good. If you don't, then you're kind of stuck with it forever. I mean, sometimes artists can undergo very huge changes in their music tones, but that's rare. But even once they change and they stick to that for a while, you don't really see very much people reaching and trying to branch out into many different genres. I think very few artists are able to do that. It's not often that artists like BTS can go through all sorts of genres very fast, but also do it very well. By including this, I'm trying to say, you know, BTS has something for everyone. If you like this type of music, they have this song. If you like this type of music, you have this song. And then, you know, if you have a song with a certain genre you like, maybe you'll be encouraged, especially once you know, learn about what their meanings of the songs are. When you start looking, that'll encourage you to go look into like other songs about BTS. And then, you know, I mean, there's a lot of genres I don't like personally, but like, because BTS made an excellent song with that genre, I'm okay with it. I don't know, that's kind of how it works for me. While expressing this, you'll see that I use various music videos from different eras, different times, different genres, with different colors, and it's a visual reminder of just how many different things they just do over the course of their past 5 years of being out in the open like this. That is important.
How controlled, I mean, the K-pop industry, I mean, are these guys, I mean, do they write their own stuff? How involved are they in their own careers, their own lives, or is it a bit of a factory?
So, this is a important part of the video, because remember how I said that the logic of this intro is to anticipate a new viewer's question and then answer it for them. This question was something I asked myself too when I started to take BTS seriously, and so this entire section is pretty much my answer to what I was asking myself, like, how are these guys different from all the K-pop acts I've seen before? Like, why are they so special? What sets them apart? And because whether we like it or not, BTS emerged into prominence out of the world of K-pop. So even if they are in a league of their own, there are a lot of newcomers who will inevitably associate K-pop with BTS. And honestly, I don't really like to be very negative about things, and I don't really have anything especially scathing to say about other individuals, but I feel it's important that I address my own experience of learning about BTS. While I'm saying this, I do not speak for armies or other fandoms. I only speak for myself as someone who was technically a part of the general audience looking in and making that decision on whether or not to stay or not. And this is not my first rodeo with K-pop. I've had my exposure to K-pop probably around 2010s, around that time, and I have listened to some groups within that time, but I did it very casually, so I had no interest in interacting with the fandom or actively promoting the group or to other people at that time. I'd still consider myself part of the general audience in that sense because I wasn't that deep into it. But this was the first time I was considering getting into it because BTS just impressed me that much. As a newcomer, I did get curious about, you know, how everyone else was doing. But after a while, I decided I was just gonna settle just for BTS alone. That doesn't mean that I don't listen to other groups. If there's like one or two good songs, I tend to listen to them that I have them on my library, but you know, I just don't feel as strongly inclined to see like the rest of their discography, or I just don't particularly want to watch anything involving them because, you know, being a fan of BTS is already a lot of work. I don't think I have the time for that, and I just, you know, didn't feel as strongly impressed with these other acts. Hence, you don't see me speaking very strongly about them. And, you know, I don't very like to make very explicit comparisons to things. And I guess I felt BTS gave me something that a lot of other acts couldn't, and it's really hard to explain what that thing is in a way that would make sense to people. Because I think one reason is that BTS has something unique about them that I most certainly sensed the first time I saw them, and eventually when I, you know, just kept listening to their music and paying attention to what they were saying, it most certainly set a really interesting bar for me when I was starting to check out what other things K-pop had to offer. I wouldn't like to say that copying is the right term for what I was observing at the time. Rather, I think the better word for it is derivative. So a lot of acts appear to be very derivative of each other. They most certainly, you know, take elements of each other as an attempt to make a better version of it, well, with mixed results. Because this fierce competition is very obsessed with constantly trying to work upon elements and just keep trying to improve it, or for better for worse, not trying to like try something new, take some risks, try to innovate and do something like different or something. Or even if they're trying to rework something, it just never seems to quite live up to expectations sometimes. I mean, sometimes it happens, but it's usually very rare. I suppose the reason why things are like this way because, you know, some people are just very stuck in their ways and don't have the resources or the, you know, confidence to like take these risks and pull it off well. And because, you know, a lot of acts are mostly very derivative of each other, and that degree of such separation is like one or two gimmicks, it kind of gives an impression that once you've seen 4 or 5 types of things, you kind of feel like you've seen it all. There's also just that cloying feeling that I feel a lot whenever I've observed some groups or just any artists I've seen, and I have full awareness that the intent behind the songs, the character and concept isn't quite as genuine. I feel like that kind of is a bit of a detracting factor too. I feel some acts I sometimes observe kind of make you very aware that they are paying lip service, and by that I mean they don't really mean what they say and their actions don't back up their words or an intent. So they can be saying something positive in their songs, but like, you know, it's not, you don't see them really follow up on that, and that's just all they say, and you know, it kind of feels like a bit of a letdown. You know, I don't always assume music groups and artists that I do like a lot are 100% genuine. I feel like they would have to have some things they just can't say, but so long as they are able to cultivate that trust and maintain a fair level of transparency and not simply play your part. But it's a very difficult thing to do because it does give a certain level of vulnerability. But as you can see, that risk has paid off very well for BTS, so perhaps there has to be room for that if anyone would dare try to emulate that, but I don't quite see that happening. So in conclusion, a huge amount of works that are out there kind of appear to be very derivative of each other, combined with the performative aspect of being an idol. And the entire thing, in a way, would come off as manufactured, which would be a pretty basic way for people to call it. Because, you know, when something's very derivative of each other and everything starts seeming very similar, albeit with like 1 or 2 gimmicks, you just start thinking, are they just churning these out just for money or something? And it quite dampens the whole experience. Anyways, that's my thoughts on the matter. I'll probably end up discussing more of these thoughts in the future episodes where we talk about each individual member, but that's your cup of coffee for me today. So this section is basically an answer to, are these guys manufactured? And in a way, I dispel their concerns and maybe convince the audience that BTS is, in a way, one of the few exceptions to that belief that they carry. That maybe they should, you know, give BTS a chance to listen to their music without prejudice, as Yoongi had said back in 2017 in the J14 interview. And of course, the most important part is how I handle the B-roll. So you do notice I use a lot of Wings era footage because it's very dark, it's very moody, it fits in with the very ominous implications of this question. So I think this one matched very well, especially with the idea of being hoisted up by strings. Once again, very dark, moody colors. And also there's a part where you see like very bright colors when the professor's talking about, you know, yeah, it sort of is potentially appears to be very manufactured in a way. And in this time I use these bright colors. You can see them with their very synchronized movements in a way it isn't, and I think maybe for some people it may seem very impressive. At the same time, it does kind of give a feeling of a factory because they're doing it all at once. Or here's this one brief clip from them filming DNA, and the colors are very, very bright, very oversaturated to the point that it makes you question whether or not this is like a real thing. To help match the mood of what's going on, I do have to pay attention to colors as well, and that's why you see me arrange things this way. And of course, when she does talk about how BTS have a great deal of creative control when it comes to their music, of course you have to put footage that matches that very well. Hopefully people can sort of understand what I was feeling when I was getting to it, but yeah, it's a bit hard to explain the real appeal that BTS possesses. But that's the best I can really explain it for now. Okay, so the next part here is a comedy sequence, because at this point when I was editing I realized, oh, this video is a bit too serious. It kind of felt like I was trying a bit too hard, so I wanted to inject some humor into this. But the hardest part about including comedy, especially if it's BTS is involved, is you have to find something that is funny out of context. Like, if someone just watched and saw them just do something, even if without subtitles, and just saw them doing this thing, it's funny. But yeah, there's a lot of fun jokes and things that I would love to include in the series, but I can't. And this starts the next sequence where we have, you know, lighthearted stuff. Just them fooling around and getting along well. So I chose You Never Walk Alone, so this was the song I chose, You Never Walk Alone. It's a bit of a tearjerker. In fact, although this was not my first choice, in fact I actually intended to put Young Forever in this ending, but I think while I was editing this was the time when the last episode of Burn the Stage came out. I was watching it with my roommate and we both cried. We're gonna go to this part, and we go here where we get to talk about a bit of a reminder for us and the audience that BTS didn't quite start out so big as they are today, because, you know, we see them everywhere now, but this wasn't how it always had been since, like, you know, when they came out in 2013. The world wasn't simply handed to them the day they debuted, so they had to work hard and hold on to their mission as a group and eventually succeed because of the support that they had amongst themselves, amongst their staff, and amongst their armies. I do sort of talk about the sort of concept that in Yoongi's episode, because his episode is sort of revolving around the idea of rags to riches, but we'll get to that later. And perhaps later when I make a era by era series, maybe I can elaborate more on that. But here we just have a quick sort of two-shot thing where we have a shot of them performing back in 2013. It was just a very small fan meeting and they were just performing No for their fans, and it was just a small, kind of was a small multi-purpose conference room from what I can tell. And eventually just shifts to recently last year where they performed that really amazing mic drop remix. A lot of ARMYs really enjoyed this, so I feel like this is something that should be shared to our own audience. Also, I think a lot of people might not have seen their performances before because they're new, so maybe seeing them be this intense might encourage them to look for more live performances. So that's the reason why they're there. But yeah, it's a very good, interesting way to see how they've changed. Now we're gonna go to UNICEF, and the reason why I put this one here is because I think I saw a lot of ARMYs say that we don't put a lot of recognition on their philanthropy work. So talking about UNICEF would be one way to start the conversation about, you know, whatever projects they've done, whatever projects ARMYs have done in their name, what donations they and ARMY have made. Having a section to that might be a little bit good for them. And, you know, I think this was a nice interview too, because I was around for this time. And I remember a lot of people like pointing out how happy they were to be asked this question. And we have some good shots from the conference while it's talking. And just to pull it back to about BTS and their music, and the fact that their music can be very relatable to people of their age, of my age, around this time. You can see where RM has a part where he connects the UNICEF campaign back to their music, where he talks about songs that are about relatable lyrics. And this part is brilliant because he lists the different songs, their names, and I can use that to basically put the music video performance related to that thing. And it's a good way to pique the viewer's interest, so that when they say, like, they look at this part, they'd be like, oh hey, that looks cool. Wait, what was the name of that song? Oh, he said it there, so maybe I'll check it out on my own time. Or if they are still in the habit, if they're still not in the habit of turning on subs, they'll be like, oh, I remember this music video, and I remember this name. Oh, he said this was had relatable lyrics. I should, you know, go back, turn it on, watch it again. So gentle reminders would work best. I think it's a good way to close off with remarks on how much they appreciate music, how much they appreciate their fans, and how much they appreciate just how much luck and hard work they've done that got them to where they are. Just close it up with their thoughts on how they feel about their impact, on their success. This actually had a lot of footage of just the guys goofing off, and I thought that was in the first two cuts, and eventually I realized that that didn't make any sense. I had to change this so that way I could feature more ARMYs in here. I think I got lucky with this one because, like I said, you know my rules about not using fan-taken footage, so this one was actually on a news channel, so I was able to use it, and I think showing them being close to their fans that way kind of helps people understand just how much they appreciate ARMYs. There is a part where they are at the AMAs and they're just so surprised that like ARMYs are cheering for them, and also cut to the time their first big award. This was 2016, and I think this was a very memorable moment for them because it was a very emotional time for everyone who was involved. I think that is a very moving moment that deserves mention. So here is the last part, and I made room so I can just focus on the lyrics by themselves. Because no intro video is an intro without, you know, talking about their music, right? Because if we're saying their music has nice words, we should show those nice words. The intro series is a good place to show off the more obscure songs, because I think most people are probably going to find those better known songs somewhere on their own anyway. So just one way of subtly promoting the lesser known songs. And then one last part, you see this part here where so if you see that again, the part where they're about to start their AMA performance, and just when the cymbals end, the cymbals in that song ends, you see they're about to pounce in that part where they do that very beginning of DNA. So this way sort of builds another level of suspense. It sort of motivates people to be like, gives a sense of completion of the video, but also something that they're missing, because I didn't show the full performance or anything, and I didn't show very much closure when, right as they pounce, the video is ended. So, and then you just have the credits and a link to the entire series and their channels. So in a way, this is a bit of a subtle strategy to motivate people to just go out on their own. If they like this, they should do their own effort of research. So that ends the first episode. And yeah, some closing thoughts on this first episode. I don't think this was a very perfect intro, mostly because I just uploaded it onto my channel, something I haven't updated it in like years or something. And I didn't know how people would take it. I didn't even think people would find it because, you know, I have little to no presence in the fandom anyway, and I thought people would eventually just be flooded with lots of videos, and I didn't think people would just check and find this or something. So yeah, I'm honestly kind of shocked that this made any impact, if at all. Honestly, I thought this would be widely disliked because I might have missed something, or I said something or presented something entirely wrong. But you know, I feel like I received a lot more kind comments than angry ones about this, so I'm grateful for that. I still feel very unsatisfied with this series because, you know, I was working on within my own limited amount of skills and my own limited time. So perhaps later I might change it, but I think one of the better qualities of this video is that I intend to make this timeless in a way, meaning that if you watch this, it can be applicable for about a year or two from now, but who knows, maybe I'll remake this entire damn thing, or someone else with far better editing skills than I do and a sense for making good intro videos will step up to the plate and improve on this. Let's see if that works. That's the first episode. Thanks for making it all this way, and we'll get started on the individual member episodes in about a week or two, depending on how busy I am. So thanks for watching. If you have questions, you are free to hit me up on Twitter, or you can leave a comment down below, and I'll probably answer it if it's appropriate. So thanks.